Thanks for being with us as we go through Faith, Sexism, and Justice, a call to action, the document from the ELCA, and we're reading the short version. This is the fifth and final section, and I'm just kind of walk through this here, and there we go. We'll begin. So as we've gone through this, the first four sections, the first section, of course, recognizing that our theology revolves around the idea that God calls us to lives of abundance and that we are called to flourish. And then the second article in this document recognizes that sin, human sin, gets in the way of flourishing and gets in the way of abundance through a variety of means. And one of them is racism, which is power, prejudice, and prestige being used against people. And that same thing happens with women and girls in sexism. And so naming in this document the ways that sexism have damaged people. And then that third section reminds us that through the baptismal call that God gives us and through the gift of Holy Communion, we are in relationship with a God who comes into our physical lives through a recognition, through discernment, and through sacrament. And so as we live lives, we are called to make real changes in the world. This isn't just some ethereal, mythic stuff that we're talking about. We're called to be looking for life abundance here and now. And so then in the last section, in the fourth section, we heard some very key ways that we're going to, within the church, begin to deal with our own change, recognizing the need for inclusive language, recognizing the need to readjust our images of God as we look at ways to describe God in our teachings, in our worship, in our lives together. In this fifth section, this is another response, another call to action for commitments in society. So the ELCA calls for action and new commitments in society. So section 4 was sort of internal to the church. Now, as a church, this is how we are engaging the world. This church teaches that God, the God who justifies, expects all people to seek justice in our earthly relationships, in our structures and in our systems. So we're justice seekers. Neighbor love is part of neighbor justice, is part of what we're about. The ELCA calls for sustained and renewed efforts through which women, girls, and gender non-conforming people experience greater equity and justice. The following commitments express this church's firm hope for renewed social relationships and structures that benefit the common good. So we're looking at some structures in the world here based around these gender identity issues. The Evangelical Lutheran Church in America commits itself to, so we're committing ourselves to these actions. First, to advocate for and support laws, policies, and practices that respect diverse bodies rather than discriminating against, objectifying, or devaluing them. Women, girls, and people who identify as non-binary must not be deprived of their human or civil rights. And this goes into our social statement on human rights. We are called to advocate for and support the eradication of gender-based violence within the church and more broadly in society by addressing both systemic aspects of such violence and the personal responsibility of those who perpetrate harm. So it's not enough for us to sort of, in a genteel, tea-sipping fashion, look around and go, oh, we don't agree with that. You've got to look around. And if there are times where people have been picked on for being non-binary, or if they're not even depending who's picking on them, we need to name that. And we need to recognize that as an ELCA, part of being an ELCA Lutheran is we're not going to tolerate it. So it's going to be spoken about. And there may be people whom we love who have lived into behaviors of abuse or power or patriarchal dynamics or whatever you want to call it, who need to be called out and need to maybe lose some of the reverence around their actions, because this is the change of behavior culturally in our churches and in society. Next, we will advocate for and support medical research. This is a big one. Advocate for and support medical research, healthcare delivery, and access to equitable and affordable healthcare services, including reproductive healthcare, by the way, that honor how bodies differ and eliminate discrimination due to sex, which can be biological, gender, or sexual orientation. And this gets into another social statement caring for health, which is a large statement, and it's a really good one. Next is to advocate for and support economic policies, regulations, and practices that enhance equity and equality for women and girls. So we have to keep an eye on these issues as Lutheran Christians in the ELCA. We have to keep an eye on policies that our governments are enacting and that are going to either support or hurt women and girls. This has to be something on our minds, with special concern for raising up women and girls who experience intersecting forms of oppression. So women and girls of color, for instance, who have all sorts of intersectionalities happening depending on where they live and the social systems that they're in, we have to be recognizing of that. We cannot forget about it. We cannot just accidentally omit that as part of our, oh, we've never thought about that before. Have to. This is a call to action. 36, advocate for and support multifaceted understandings of social and economic roles so that neither our human traits, such as courage or compassion, nor our callings, such as business leader or stay-at-home parent, are dictated by our sex, biological, and gender. Encourage and empower all people to use their gifts for the sake of the common good, whether at home, at work, or in the public sphere. So first of all, we're going to recognize that sometimes people are doing different things that are not necessarily in traditional gender roles. So, and that's good. We're good with that. That's part of life here, is that we don't have an expectation based on your gender or your whatever that you're going to become something. We're going to work against that patriarchal norm, and we're going to be a place that lifts you up and recognizes you as a valued person. And likewise, we're going to push and cajole our people to do what they're called to do, not to find their home in a gender specific role and live a life that's less than abundant or less than flourishing. And so that's a call to action as well. We're going to advocate for and support resources for families of various configurations. So families don't all look like they necessarily are the same thing. Families look different in communities in which they live. Empower parents and all who raise or care for children or other family members to nurture, protect, and provide for their households in ways that do not reinforce gender-based stereotypes. In particular, advocate for institutional changes that support and encourage men and boys to participate in all family roles associated with the home: caregiving, parenting, and nurturing. So this church does not support the sexism at home and the idea that there's women's work and that there's men's work. In fact, this church calls men to help out, which I think is a profound statement, but it's very necessary. And so we're saying it, we're lifting it up as a call. And caregiving, parenting, and nurturing are both parents' job. A couple more. Advocate for and support legal reforms, humane policies, and adequate services for migrants, immigrants, refugees, and asylum seekers, especially those experiencing intersecting forms of oppression. So we as a church stand opposed to child separation. We as a church, based on this document we've agreed upon, stand opposed to abusing or continuing to make it harder for women of color and especially immigrants as they come into this country, for all the ways that they're broken up, for all the ways that they're hurt, for all the ways the system is set up to hurt them. We stand opposed to that. And we have to work towards breaking that down and making systemic changes around making that non-existent. Advocate for and support portrayals in entertainment, media, and advertising that do not objectify or stereotype people, but rather show all people as capable of wide variety of human characteristics and roles. If you're a person who's a member of this church and you're involved in media, you're involved in advertising, you're involved in communications, please join this church's effort in doing your part to not perpetuating these roles, to finding ways to find creative solutions, or if you're able to stand up to the power within your company or your workflow, to make a change and to work on those language elements that make such a difference down the road. And the final one here for today's piece is advocate for and support means for increasing women's participation in local, state, and national politics. This is a big systemic change, with special attention to the proportionate advocacy and support needed by those who face intersecting forms of oppression. So again, women of color, people in non-binary roles, all of these different folks who have an opportunity to speak with even more nuance should go to the head of the line. And as a white male who is able to be part of these conversations, I recognize that while I can bring all of my gifts to this participation, to this conversation, that others who have more to say than I do should have the floor. And so those are the kind of systemic and calls to action that we're going to be about in this church as we move forward. It is not enough to just name sexism or name racism. It is only enough to become an anti-racist or an anti-sexist. And that means calling to action. That means putting action into work, into real life, and then dealing and processing with the ramifications of that effort. So I'd just like to thank everybody for being part of this. I encourage you to read the long version if you're interested in that, because they go into a lot more theology and a lot more statistics and a lot more support with all the different things that are in this short version. But for our church, for our conversation, I'd like to just, again, end this section and let you have questions and comments about, life abundant, being caught by sin that holds us from the abundant life, that the church has the tools that we need to move forward in issues of sexism, that we will deal with our own stuff and we will make those ideals called into action in our music, in our words. And then finally, that as we live in life, we will advocate and stand for these things. As an ELCA congregation, as a member of this congregation, welcome to this work, and thanks for being part of it.